Hello, and welcome back to How to Art. I apologise in advance, I'm going to be talking a lot this episode, but it is important and I feel that what I have to say will aid you greatly, so bear with me and hopefully you'll enjoy it too. Okay, so today we start off our mini-series on making a comic book. Thank you very much for tuning in. And in order to make a comic book, first we're gonna need to have a story. So, how do we make a story for a comic book? Well, that's something that I'm going to go through with you today. Now, you may recognise this if you've ever done creative writing or English literature at school of the 5 rules of writing, and I've modified it somewhat though, as comics are slightly different to books. Okay, so the main 5, alright, I call it the Fantastic 5+1, is you need to think of a concept. You need to expand the concept into a story, also known as the plot. You need to make each scene relevant. You need to have some character development. You need to have some character motive. And I've also included an extra one that is added depending on the type of story you're writing, and that's called controversy. Alright, now I'm going to be going into each element individually, and I will be making an example of a story with you so you can see how I'm applying this knowledge. Now, you may have noticed I have 2 separate tabs for character development and character motive, and I'm going to be explaining why I have separated them, but the short answer is they are quite different. Okay, so let's begin. Before we do begin, I just want to go through some do's and don'ts. Now, a lot of you will probably be worried that you're not good enough, or you struggle with some things, or you make mistakes here. Don't worry, alright? Now, there's only 4 things that you need for this. You need a story that sticks to a concept, you need character development, you need motives, and you need relevant scenes. That's all you need, alright? You don't need to be good at English. All right? I'm not very good at English, I'm awful at English, it's my worst subject. And Carl Pilkington has actually written more books than he's read. Now, I really like Carl Pilkington, but there's a classic case of someone that is able to write a story, write some books, despite struggling with English greatly, alright? You don't need humans either, so if you want to do a story with animals, you want to do a story with, I don't know, animated potatoes, that is perfectly fine. You don't need humans. You don't need to make your plot linear either. If you want to keep it ambiguous, if you want to branch off, that's okay. That is perfectly fine. You don't also need to have an ending either. Now, because we're going to be doing comic books and things, a lot of them actually sort of thrive on cliffhangers. So if you wanted to write a story and it ends on a cliffhanger or an ambiguous ending, that's okay too. And the last one is, it doesn't have to be original, alright? Everyone says every story has to be original, but to be honest with you, I think the last original story, really, like if you break it down to its bare bones, was written by Homer from the Iliad in the Greek times, you know, because even things like Star Wars and that, they all sort of are evolutions of ancient Greek mythology and stories that come from thousands of years ago. So you don't even need it to be original. Obviously your concept might need to be original, but the actual story itself doesn't. Okay, so a concept is quite literally an abstract idea. So the first thing you want to do when writing a story is you need to have something the story focuses around. Now, this is very important. The good news is this can be literally anything you want. Okay, it can be wacky, unrealistic, surreal, literally anything. All I would suggest is you try and make it either unique or interesting, ideally both. Okay, just to prove it can be done with anything. Off the top of my head, I've got an idea, okay? A mountain biking vampire travelling back in time to modern day from the future. Now that sounds absolutely ridiculous, but I'm going to use that just to show you how with anything you can make into a story, providing you follow the rules, okay? So what I want you to do now is, if you have an idea, pause the video and write down the concept either on paper or on Word. Either is fine, just get it down. Should be 1 sentence, but if it's a bit more complicated, then you can do a bit more, and it should be fairly small. But so just pinpoint an idea of what you want to make a story about, okay? If you need a bit of help with some ideas, then keep watching. Otherwise, pause the video now. Okay, so if you need some help with this, I've just dotted down some concepts from my head that are either interesting or unique. Now you don't need to stick to this word for word, you can merge more than one together. You can adapt these, or you can see how I've written it, come up with your own as well. So if you like what I've written and you want to do a story on that and you think I can make a great story, great. If you want to sort of think, oh that's what he means, okay, I've got an idea now, that's fine too. This is whatever you want, okay? So now I want you to pause the video and write down your concept so we can carry on. Great, so we should have a concept, and at the end of this video I want to hear what you've come up with. Brilliant, now we have our concept, we need to write it into a story. Typically you want to follow the generic layout of introducing the story and setting, that's called exposition, have a build up and conflict, reach a climax, this is the worst position for the characters to be in, and find a resolution, how they overcome or don't overcome the situation. Now you don't need to stick to this like glue, you can adapt and change things. You can also end a story on a climax, and this is called a cliffhanger. This is good for comics, especially if you want to make multiple issues. You'll find in comics that you will try to put in mini cliffhangers at the end of each page, and I will explain that more in greater detail later in this series. But for now, you want to write a plot following this template. Remember when I mentioned my story about the vampire cyclist from the future? Well, as promised, I've written that into a little plot. Check this out, ready? Alucard Stoker is a teenage vampire in the year 2400, where humans are extinct. He comes across an old bicycle and soon finds he greatly enjoys riding it. However, there are no skate parks, and everything is so dark and rainy he is unable to cycle properly. He speaks to his father's Grand Mage, who agrees to send him back to the year 1999, providing he brings him back some Mounds bars, as confectionery has been eradicated since 2005. When Alucard travels back in time, he soon manages to make some friends with some goths who think he is cool, and they end up competing in a BMX competition. One of the girls in his friendship group, called Violet, ends up falling in love with Alucard, and he confesses to her he is a vampire from the future. They have an argument and she leaves, but returns in the bicycle finals, giving Alucard the motivation to win. They reunite, and Alucard decides to stay in the year 1999 with his new girlfriend, and they live happily ever after. I have my concept maintained, as the story focuses around his desire to ride a bike. The build-up is the travelling back in time and finding the friendship group. The conflict is sort of the competition and his hidden secret that he is in fact a vampire. And the climax is Alucard falling out with Violet and being in the finals of the championship. And the resolution is him winning, making up with Violet and deciding to stay where he is. Now there are a few flaws with this, such as his vampirism doesn't seem to have a focus point. However, we could add those elements in, such as not being able to go out during the day and so on. And we could maybe reach a resolution further by him being able to cure his vampirism, but this is just an idea. Unfortunately, most plots are very linear. So, same as before, what I want you to do is write about 2 paragraphs, maybe 3, of the plot of your story. If you're still struggling, use the setup that I have provided of expenditure, conflict, climax and resolution. Also, please note your plot does not have to include everything, okay? It is different to the story. The plot is just a summary of your story explaining the gist of what happens. You can also edit it as many times as you want and change things, just get the main parts down. So what I want you to do now, pause the video and write down your plot. Making each scene relevant. This is an important factor. I will emphasize, if the scene does not progress the story in any way, do not include it. One of the reasons there was a lot of backlash towards Game of Thrones was because of how many pointless scenes there were that served no purpose to the story whatsoever. There are arguments about how it was going somewhere, but because the story was changed last minute, it made a huge chunk of the show redundant. If it doesn't aid the story in any way, don't include it. I'm probably going to get some hate now, but The Last Jedi had a whole element of these strange birds called porgs that held no purpose to the story whatsoever. They were just a marketing ploy of cuteness to sell toys, which probably boosted the merchandise of the franchise, but didn't aid the story whatsoever, and as a result, compromised it. Imagine if Saving Private Ryan, they all stopped halfway through to build a sandcastle. It'd probably ruin the entire mood of the film. You want to write a story that is considered art. This is your baby. Don't compromise it. Now, I am going to talk about character development in a minute, and this is relevant, and I'm going to explain why. But for now, remember, only include it if it is relevant to the story. Character development is just as important as the plot. If your audience does not care about your characters, then why would they care about the story? Take Infinity War. Spoiler alert. One of the reasons the death of Spider-Man and Doctor Strange was so impacting was because of how you saw the characters' relationships build throughout the movie, and how they changed and became who they were. In Justice League, however, there was barely any character development, which meant no one cared about the characters, and as a result their mission was fairly uninteresting, because you don't care about the characters, they're just strangers. You need to make sure you're putting in scenes in the story that make the characters who they are. Even if you take a break from the plot and have two characters drinking coffee in a cafe talking about their personalities, it is important to build these relationships up so your audience have compassion towards them. You don't need to always build the plot. Taking a break is fine, as long as it has a purpose to the story. George R.R. Martin is a genius of this and has found a way to make the audience fall in love with 90% of his characters, which makes their deaths so much more impactful. If you can find a way to progress both character development and story in the same scene, even better, as you're killing two birds with one stone. Comics have a way of having conversations during fight scenes, doing just this. Now, there is another reason why they do that, and I will be explaining that next week. Character motive. The reason I made this separate to development is how the character progresses throughout the story. It's how they change, what their demons are, what their morals are, etc., and how much they follow them. Essentially, development is their evolution. Motive is why your characters are doing what they are doing. One of the reasons why Ronan the Accuser was so pathetic is because he is just evil because he is evil. Like, what's the point in that? Why is he doing what he is doing? You probably don't have any idea who I'm even talking about, right? He's the villain of Guardians of the Galaxy, the main one. Yeah, exactly. However, Thanos, you know instantly who that is, don't even have to say the film, has a great deal of motive and development, and you understand why he is the way he is. Some people going so far to say they agree with him. You need to ensure your characters have sufficient motive. If it doesn't make sense to the audience, it will impact the story greatly. So make sure your characters do what they do for a valid reason. Finally, I'm going to talk about controversy. Now, this isn't essential, but if you are going to have a protagonist and an antagonist, then you will need to have controversy. What I mean by controversy is some people agree and others disagree with their views and motives. A good rivalry should have two characters that are very similar and share a common goal, with one thing that separates them. Some great films, Spider-Man, The Dark Knight, Rocky Balboa, Toy Story, even Zoolander had great rivalries which automatically boost the development and motives of the characters in it. If we look at Spider-Man Homecoming from 2017, one of the reasons the film holds up very well is the rivalry between Vulture and Spider-Man. Both have been overlooked by Tony Stark and have lost a lot. However, Spider-Man still wants to use his powers for good and help Iron Man, but Vulture believes he needs to punish Iron Man for what he's done. This one element, separating them and giving the audience a controversial argument, really sets the characters together. So if you have a goodie and a baddie, try and make them similar with one thing that separates them. That is it from me, so remember the fantastic 5+1. Concept, plot, making each scene relevant, character development, character motive, and optional controversy. Now, I want you to use everything I've told you and write your own story. It doesn't have to be long, but make sure you follow the rules and you will be golden. Also, do you agree or disagree with anything I said? Maybe you think I'm wrong about some of the films I've mentioned. Let me know in the comments below. I want to hear your opinion.